Hello everyone, I'm William Vivian, a founding director of Regenesys Business School. Welcome to this masterclass. Before I hand you over to your facilitator, I would like to introduce you briefly to Regenesys. Regenesys is a Johannesburg-based business and public management school with offices in Mumbai, India and Lagos, Nigeria. We have since 1998 been training and placing students in reputable organizations, helping them to achieve their goals by developing their management and leadership potential. We strive to develop analytical thinkers, problem solvers who are emotionally intelligent and value-driven, leaders who can operate successfully as we head into the fifth industrial revolution. Our programs generate new options for career advancement, wealth creation, and they will help you to expand your sphere of influence in our rapidly changing global environment. If your interest is piqued by the overview this masterclass provides and you want to join our online classes, you'll find more information on our digital courses and academic programs at regenesys.net.
Ladies and gentlemen, just to highlight perhaps a bit of a roadmap for this afternoon, and then we'll get into the practicalities. So what we're looking at this afternoon is the fifth industrial revolution, to try and demystify and unpack this very big term, and then look at how to navigate the COVID-19 experience and beyond humanly. Couple of key touch points this afternoon. First of all, we're going to try and unpack the terms, as I say, with particular focus on the rise of purposeful living and leadership, and how this has been enabled through both the fifth industrial revolution and COVID-19. We're then going to have a look at asking and answering the question, what is the impact of having nature as a key stakeholder at the boardroom table? And how do we both survive and thrive through COVID-19 and beyond? And to do that, we're going to take a very basic neuroscience perspective. We're then going to personalize this and ask ourselves, as leaders and managers or aspirant leaders and managers, how do we shift our thinking so that we are able to enable relevant mind shift and insight generation in ourselves and others? And then finally, what are the three habits? What are the takeaways from today that you can immediately apply when you come off this call to optimize the fifth industrial revolution for ourselves and for our teams? So Robin, without ado, let's start with the fifth industrial revolution. And I think this is quite a nice depiction of the development of the various industrial revolutions through history. As we can see, when we look at this continuum, is increasingly technology and intelligent technology is having a much bigger role to play. Now, depending on what lens you view, particularly the fourth and the fifth industrial revolution, there has been a tendency perhaps in the past for people to be a little nervous of AI and big data and robotics. And I tuned into the previous two masterclasses where both speakers acknowledged that this does cause enormous concern for many people. The fifth industrial revolution is, how do we optimize all the good things about the fourth? Because clearly we will not succeed into the future as the human race without AI, big data, robotics, etc. But how do we rehumanize and how do we repurpose both life and work? And this is the key big question in the fifth industrial revolution. How do we reconnect innovation to flourishing humanity? Now, this sounds like a very lofty purpose, but I'm going to hopefully this afternoon make a very important case as to why we need to take the fifth industrial revolution extremely seriously. And perhaps also to provide some tips as to how we leverage the really good pieces of both the fourth and the fifth to be able to survive and thrive into the future. It was very interesting if we compare the focus of Davos 2018 with the focus of the World Economic Forum at Davos last year. In 2018, the focus was fundamentally on the blockchain, AI and big data, and the advent and application of the fourth industrial revolution. Last year, in an event that was sponsored by Forbes and MIT and Tata, the key theme was summarized in this rather lovely formula and very relevant: blockchain plus AI plus human equals magic. And this is our challenge. How do we bring human back into this equation? How do we practically repurpose and rehumanize life and work? So that was just quite an interesting trend. If we take our discussion on purpose a little bit further, we'll know that researchers like Simon Sinek and others for a while have been encouraging us to find our purpose and to be able to define our why. Now, again, this sounds very lofty. We're going to see it's not that easy to do, given most of us do not spend enough time thinking around what is our why and why is our purpose. And we've got some interesting research coming your way soon, which actually proves this. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the issue of not knowing our why is we tend to think and live and work in autopilot. It's very much a narrow vision, it's a narrow lens, and we are tending not to think enough about how do we collaborate with others for the common good of everyone? How can we purposefully contribute to uplifting everyone so that we can both survive and thrive into the future? And I'd like us to start off with a very short practical exercise in this regard. We're going to give you 20 seconds and we're going to ask you to answer these 3 questions and quickly jot them down. Now, 20 seconds is going to go extremely quickly. So I will start by way of example. Who am I? I am a very fit, energetic, passionate family member, friend, educator, and coach. I get up every morning to help other people unlock their genius so that they can help others unlock their genius. And why should you care? Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are living in such times of crisis and disruption. We need everybody to bring their best thinking to the table. Not too bad, just under 20 seconds. Ladies and gentlemen, please grab your pens and let's see how you do. If you finish a little earlier, please hop onto the Q&A and let Robin know what you're thinking, how you're feeling, how this is going. Your time starts now. And ladies and gentlemen, your time is up. Robin, what were you noticing on the Q&A? Any comments coming through?
So what I noticed just from my personal perspective on answering those questions is they're not too easy, Les. I thought you would start us off with a bit of an easier activity in terms of 20 seconds to define those things. I think I was still at the first, who am I? And then I found myself, drifting and trying to define that. Like, how do we define that? A lot of people saying not easy to do that. Some people saying I'm a woman with dreams, which I think is quite strong and powerful. I wake up every morning to fulfill my dreams. Some people saying I couldn't finish that in 20 seconds. Les, I was there. I started writing and then it was done.
Robin, thank you for that feedback. And ladies and gentlemen, the reality is this is hard. We really have to apply our minds to this to be able to share our purpose in what we would call an elevator conversation, extremely quick. And if again, we go back to the research of Simon Sinek and Michael Chavez and others, we can see that generally speaking, most people are not able to define their purpose quickly. People acknowledge it is something they know it is important to do, but they need more time. And as long as we're on the journey in our quest to define the purpose, we are certainly on the right path. As we said, the danger is without it, we may find ourselves drifting through life and where we're not taking ownership and accountability for making a significant contribution. So thank you everyone for participating. So ladies and gentlemen, where does this take us now? Well, during 2019, we saw unprecedented unrest in most parts of the world, if you think about it. People finding their voice around oppression and inequality and poverty, and many, many voices rising around climate activism. Now, although we heard more purposeful voices, and this was certainly an indication that the fifth industrial revolution was starting to kick in, perhaps we didn't take everything seriously enough. And what happened was nature then took her place at the boardroom table. Nature found her voice. And if you think back, in addition to all the unrest, we had unprecedented natural disasters in 2019. As I quickly flick through these, I'm sure you will recognize how serious this really was. And so we felt the power of nature. Nature really tipping us into the fifth industrial revolution, reminding us that we were not purposeful enough in our approach to people and the planet. The end of 2019, I think around the globe, people generally thought that we had sorted this out. Unfortunately, nature was not done. And what happened next was in December, 31st of December, 2019, the first case of COVID-19 was reported to the World Health Organization. Now, this was nature speaking really loudly and really opening the door for purpose to walk in. Because without all the really good leverage points of the fourth and fifth industrial revolution, ladies and gentlemen, the reality is millions of people are and will get sick and will potentially die. This is a significant threat to the human race on planet Earth. Very interesting and sad in a way that nature had to take her place at the boardroom table to expedite our move into the fifth industrial revolution. From a purpose point of view, we can see on a personal level many people showing up, sewing masks, making hand sanitizers, using their home 3D printers to print face shields, and other organizations repurposing their value chains for PPE to protect the health workers on the front line, building ventilators and others. And governments taking different approaches, but collaborating a lot better around how to beat this pandemic. So we are, ladies and gentlemen, seeing the rise of purposeful living and purposeful leadership. It is not perfect. We know together with this, there are concerns around abuse of power around the world, issues around police states and lockdown, and other issues, domestic violence, etc. But the rise of purposeful living and working is definitely happening. So ladies and gentlemen, the practical question is, how do we then both survive and thrive through COVID-19 and beyond? And we're going to take a very basic neuroscience perspective on this. And I'm going to be using a wonderful model. The reference is Dan Siegel. It's called the hand model of the brain. You're very welcome to reference this after today and to go and have a look at a little more detail. But to demonstrate this, I'm going to ask you to please work with me on this one and to follow my cue. I'm going to ask you to lift your hand. Ladies and gentlemen, if our hand represents our head brain, our wrist area represents the spinal cord. This is the connection between the head brain and the body. I'm talking head brain because we also have brain neurons in our hearts and in our gut. The palm represents the 300 million year old part of the brain called the brain stem, which literally keeps us alive. It regulates our breathing, our heartbeat, digestion, and many other processes. If we close our thumb into our palm, our thumb represents the limbic area of the brain, a 200 million year old brain. fundamentally working with the brain stem and the body to drive emotion. It is the limbic area of the brain that drives our fight, flight, and freeze response to threat. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a moment. If you curl your fingers over your hand, the finger area represents the cortex. The knuckles, the frontal cortex, which helps the brain make meaning of external stimuli from the external environment. And the fingers represent a critical part of the mammalian brain, not as old as the reptilian brain, the chief executive officer of our brain. Ladies and gentlemen, the prefrontal cortex integrates all the other parts of the brain. It helps keep us grounded, it helps keep us calm, and it is the area of logical and high performance thinking, complex problem solving, and decision making. Ladies and gentlemen, when we do not activate the prefrontal cortex and threat and crisis hits, we flip our lid. And that's where we talk about the fight, flight, or freeze response. So I hope that that very basic introduction to the brain is useful as we start unpacking our questions a little bit further. So let's take this one step further, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, we have a survival brain. Yes, we have a limbic brain, a lizard brain, which has a very loud voice. It is the dominant voice in our brain because that is how we have survived through history. But how, as leaders and managers, do we need to shift our thinking so that we can enable relevant mind shift and insight generation? How do we keep ourselves out of that, what we call the limbic flip? And how do we bring high performance thinking of self and others to the table? Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's not easy because the pressures of COVID-19 have meant that we have to unlearn some of our hardwired survival behaviors. We rely as human beings on connection. And now we're in lockdown, and potentially we're going to be in lockdown for the next 2 years, or in and out of lockdown for the next 2 years or so. So traditional ways that the good brain chemicals were released through physical connection are not there anymore. And we're having to physically distance, possibly wear face masks into the future. So the question is, how do we leverage the good parts of the survival brain, and what do we have to do to thrive? To try to explain this, I'm going to use a simple analogy of an iceberg. An iceberg has components below the level of the water and above the level of the water. The hard part of personal leadership and leadership of others is what happens below the level of the water. Now let's start off by looking at survival thinking. As we've said, the key emotion, the default emotion when crisis hits, is fear. That is our normal hardwired human reaction. From a thinking point of view, the danger is that a fear response tends to pull us away from crisis and disruption. We focus more on the fear and anxiety rather than on how to step through it and how to contribute to a more meaningful goal. What this means, ladies and gentlemen, if we think purely in our survival lizard brain, is in Carol Dweck's terms, we operate off a fixed mindset. And a fixed mindset does not like to be challenged. It does not enjoy coming out of comfort zone. And it becomes very threatened when there's not a clear path forward.
So Leslie, would I just be in this mode, in survival mode, on lockdown, just trying to survive lockdown in a sense, waiting for it to be over instead of trying to thrive through this process or thrive through this time?
Very much so, Robin. And this takes a whole lot of negative energy. Energy that we should rather, as I'm going to argue in a moment, be putting into thinking about how do we both survive and thrive through COVID-19. Because fight, flight, or freeze does not build trust. It destroys trust. It does not build purpose. really all it does is insulate us in cocoons. The blame game starts to happen a lot, judgment, and high performance thinking does not sit in this space. So Robin, you are absolutely correct. So ladies and gentlemen, we have to rewire the new habits to keep us alive during COVID-19. The hard part is it is through physical distancing, fundamentally. But what is the other alternative? How, as leaders and managers, can we shift our thinking to enable relevant mind shift and insight generation to also be able to thrive? This is not an and or. We're arguing we can and we absolutely need to be doing both. So I love this little picture just to exemplify the key point. Sorry, we're closed. Yep, we're in lockdown, but still awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, the message is we have to change the narrative. And to change the narrative, we have to change the way we think. So I'm going to go back to our iceberg, but this time have a look at what it takes to thrive through COVID-19 and beyond, and also how we pull these amazing fifth industrial revolution principles and values and leverage those to be able to thrive. Ladies and gentlemen, thriving requires a growth mindset. It is the exact opposite of fixed. A growth mindset appreciates that when there is crisis and disruption, it is what it is, but it provides an incredible opportunity for learning and growth and contribution. A growth mindset will not incubate or cocoon itself, but will reach out, albeit virtually, to try and make a difference. What a growth mindset does is drive the high performance behaviors we will need to thrive through COVID-19 and beyond. Virtual collaboration, critical thinking, agility and resilience. And thrive, ladies and gentlemen, we know we're getting closer when we have more people purposefully collaborating for the benefit of others. To be able to do this, here's this fantastic fifth industrial revolution notion. We have to live and lead with purpose. That is why I started the first activity with, do you know your why? Are we bringing purpose into our teams, our families, into our organizations and the world? Purpose helps create social and psychological safety. So whereas prior to this, prior to COVID-19, we've relied on physical connection for oxytocin, which is that positive brain chemical for bonding and belonging and minimizing fear and building trust. Through purpose, we can do that really well, even in a lockdown world. Ladies and gentlemen, purpose and social safety and building trust enables us to draw on our wonderful, ingrained human capabilities of empathy and curiosity, while leveraging all the technological benefits of the fourth industrial revolution. This is what makes us human and which would make the most sophisticated AI and robotics extremely difficult to copy. We need to start drawing on what makes us human to both survive and thrive through COVID-19. This response to crisis allows us to step out of our comfort zone into discomfort, into a space of experimentation and learning, and purposefully is the key here. So ladies and gentlemen, from a very basic neuroscience perspective, we know that we can both survive and thrive through COVID-19 and beyond. We can optimize this amazing opportunity that the fifth industrial revolution has provided us with. And we can thank nature for stepping into our lives and our work to remind us about what it takes to be human. In our deepest thinking processes, we know this. We've got to draw on it and make it happen. So ladies and gentlemen, as we start to close this out, and we'll invite you shortly to engage with us a little bit around this. It seems when we flick through a couple of slides and we draw on some key research that this is easy. This is extremely hard, particularly through times like we're in now, COVID-19, which is taking a lot of energy and focus away from purposeful contribution. I don't know about you, but many of my friends and my colleagues and my family members are increasingly saying how tired they are. Just before this presentation, I was chatting to a dear colleague who was saying she couldn't get out of bed this morning. And so what she's had to do, despite being really busy as a consultant, is she's had to take the whole of next week off. Now, this is very significant. So what are the kinds of habits we can apply to both survive and to thrive? And how do we prevent the possible backsliding to that hardwiring that has become so ingrained in our brains? Firstly, ladies and gentlemen, we have to live and work with purpose. We have to consciously work hard at defining our purpose, being able to express this in 20 seconds or less, because it is that clear to us. And then we need to bring purposeful conversations into our families, our friends, and social groups, into our teams, especially now that we're working virtually. Purpose has got to be on the agenda. In fact, perhaps the lead-in to virtual team conversations is a constant reminder. Why do we get up in the morning, and why do we do what we do? What is that purposeful contribution beyond us, beyond our organization, to others? So that philanthropic lens, which takes us out of our narrow cocoon to starting to think purposefully, how do we contribute? We've got to think consciously about self-care. Ladies and gentlemen, are you getting between 7 to 9 hours quality sleep a night? If not, what are you doing about it? When we check in our virtual teams, are we finding out how are people doing? Are they able to get quality sleep? And if not, what are the triggers and barriers, and how can we help work through that? Are we getting enough exercise every day? I think a lot of us are feeling totally locked into our computer screens. It's almost like the Matrix. We're in a very different world at the moment. Are we getting at least 20 to 30 minutes every day of good quality physical exercise? Are we watching what we eat and what we drink? Are we strategically refueling our prefrontal cortex to be able to do this conscious thinking work that we need for complex problem solving? And what are the kinds of rituals that we're bringing into life and work to make sure that purposeful thinking and self-care rule in terms of our discussions? Excuse me. If we are not getting quality sleep, are we practicing mindfulness practices? Ladies and gentlemen, if we don't do yoga, for example, there are excellent mindfulness apps that we can try and download, perhaps work through them before we go to sleep at night, when we wake up in the morning. I'm coaching an executive team at the moment, which opens every virtual team discussion with a short mindfulness activity to bring everybody into a relaxed, purposeful, physiological state. Enormously powerful. And then, ladies and gentlemen, are we focusing on how we're breathing? The research is very interesting, that most people at the moment are hyperventilating and we don't even realize it. This is the impact of the enormous fear and anxiety and stress that we're carrying at the moment through COVID-19. Again, if you're not doing yoga or similar, download some breathing apps and consciously start working on your breathing. You will notice how quickly good breathing brings your brain-body system into a relaxed physiological state. And then, ladies and gentlemen, are we practicing gratitude? There is so much to be grateful for. Are we acknowledging that on a personal level, in our teams, in our organizations, in our communities? For example, on a family level, do we have a gratitude jar? Gratitude jar is something we fill every day with gratitudes, and perhaps daily or weekly we open up the jar and everybody shares those gratitudes? Are we purposefully and intentionally bringing gratitude into our team discussions? Because gratitude is an enormous enabler of the prefrontal cortex and high performance thinking. Gratitude enables oxytocin, serotonin, and dopamine, those critical positive brain chemicals that bring us to a relaxed physiological state to do our best thinking and to minimize the impact of cortisol, which can make us extremely sick. Ladies and gentlemen, there's a lot of discussion in the healthcare world at the moment that the healthcare workers are fearing in many respects the impact of cortisol on the brain-body system, making people ill, equally so to the dangers of COVID-19 at the moment. So we really have to take good care and we have to practice conscious habits to be able to optimize this great potential that the brain holds for us. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to give you literally another 20 seconds or so before we close out and open for a plenary discussion, to note down what are the 3 habits you are going to apply immediately you leave this discussion this afternoon. Perhaps what are you already doing that now has been validated as being really great for surviving and thriving through COVID-19 and beyond, but what could you do a little better or differently? Please write it down, because in writing down, you are starting to create new maps in your brain. This is related to the concept of neuroplasticity. It's a very lofty neuroscience term, but it does mean that we can rewire our brain. And in doing so, we can actually even change the structure of our brains. So please just take a few moments to jot down your 3 habits. When you're done, perhaps onto the Q&A, just to let Robin know how you are doing. Your time.
Please share some of your habits. Sorry, Les, before Les gives you a bit of time, she's going to count you down on some time, but we'd love to hear what you're doing that you are doing well. How are you bringing self-care into your work and into your home environment? I think it'd be great for us to share what is working well. I love the concept of the gratitude jar. I feel like that's something as a family you could really get into and start practicing. It could become a practice of self-care, which would be amazing. So please share once you've written down what you're doing and what you're doing well. Okay, so we've got some people coming in that are getting enough sleep. They're eating earlier and they're being consistent with exercise. So I know there's some great, I think Discovery's got a wonderful campaign out now with exercise with the family, which is great. A lot of YouTube videos. There's a lot of great YouTube yoga. Another person saying they're exercising as a family. That is working really well. Positive communication amongst family.
Good.
Yoga for 45 minutes every day. I think that's amazing, particularly relating to the breathing that you were discussing. I find it fascinating, your statistic on people hyperventilating and not realizing it from not actually breathing and connecting the brain and the body.
That's really good to hear, Robin. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for engaging with us. At the moment, I haven't got line of sight to the Q&A, but Robin, in terms of what you were sharing, what is interesting to me is people tend to focus on the physical dimension. So as we depart out of this particular part of the conversation, I just want to remind you and challenge you to please think about your why. What is your purpose? How is that driving you? Why do you get up every morning? And how does that heighten your contribution during this particular epidemic and period? But thank you for sharing. That's amazing to hear.
There's some fantastic ideas coming through. Fantastic ideas. I think a lot of people have found cooking as a wonderful means of surviving lockdown as well. Great to see that coming through as well.
Wonderful. Robin, thanks for sharing. Right. So, ladies and gentlemen, as we start closing this conversation, couple of things just to remind ourselves about on this journey this afternoon. I hope what we've done is unpack the essence of the fifth industrial revolution. It is about rehumanizing and repurposing life and work. I hope that we have demonstrated in a very basic way that it is possible to both survive and thrive during COVID-19 and beyond, drawing on the best of the fourth industrial revolution and the fifth. But ultimately, we will have to change the way we think. This will require what we call more conscious thinking, that is activating that prefrontal cortex for more conscious thinking, because the reality, ladies and gentlemen, most of us operate with unconscious thinking 90 to 98% of the day. And for this reason, we saw, for example, the panic buying just prior to lockdown, this absolute focus on toilet paper and other interesting things. We'll try not to be judgmental, although it's hard being human. And of course, Donald Trump's very interesting revelations almost on a daily basis now, moving from wanting to build walls recently to not allowing immigrants into the United States, particularly during this COVID period. And I heard yesterday now wanting to sue China for COVID-19. This is an example of unconscious autopilot thinking. And as we're saying, purposeful contribution thinking requires a little more rationality, perhaps, a little more collaboration, and a little more creativity. Carl Jung has this wonderful saying, until you make your unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate. Maybe the easy way out, ladies and gentlemen. So in conclusion, I'd like to leave us all with this question. To think and survive and thrive, or not to think? That is the question. Ladies and gentlemen, the reality of COVID-19 is we are, to use Simon Sinek's terms again, in an infinite game. We do not know where this is going to end up. We do not know when treatment or a vaccine is going to be found. We pray that it will be soon. There are many players in this game, but it is not a finite game. It is an infinite game. And for that reason, we need to leverage the best of the fourth and the fifth industrial revolutions. And we need to really dig deep and draw and leverage and optimize all those amazing things that make us human. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you. And I'm going to hand over to Robin to open up the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Leslie. So many points, so many things we've discussed, and I'd love to continue this conversation further, as I'm sure all our participants would as well. Going through some of the questions, the one that a couple that really speak to me now is, as leaders, where do we start? Where do we start on this whole approach? How do we start leading teams? We're used to leading teams in a very physical space, like you say. Overnight, they've moved to a virtual space. So how do we start dealing with that hard wiring that we've been so used to? Things like mindfulness and self-care aren't usual boardroom topic conversations for some of us. They haven't been discussed. They haven't been part of our agendas or our meetings. So where do we start, Les? It's a bit overwhelming.
Right. Well, Robin, if we think about our Thrive argument a little earlier, we have to start with purpose. Through this epidemic, we have to find our why. Because if we are not intentional and deliberate and clear on an individual, a family, a community, team, organization, nation, global level on what our purpose is, the brain, the reptile brain, is going to try and cocoon us And we will not be thinking purposefully and using our high performance thinking capability to think our way through this in a collaborative and contribution oriented way. So purpose has to come first. If our purpose as an individual is not clear, I hope it's perhaps the first of those 3 habits that people noted down a little earlier, is to really find our why. And then in our teams, our virtual teams, to ask and start answering the question, why do we exist as a team? Why do we exist as a team in the context of our department, our division, our organization, our sector, our nation, and the world? And these are not easy questions to ask and answer. They do require us to engage that prefrontal cortex. But if we do not start there, Robin, people are going to survive, we hope, through COVID-19 and beyond, but are going to come out on the other end deeply fatigued and potentially very ill, not necessarily through COVID-19. So we have to start taking the foundations of neuroscience really, really carefully. Purpose rules. Then, of course, how do we create social and psychological safety for ourselves, our families, our teams, our organizations? And this relates, as you beautifully summarized in a moment, to asking questions like, how do we bring mindfulness practices in intentionally and deliberately? How do we open conversations around self-care and care of others? How do we bring breathing techniques into our virtual team conversations, so that very purposefully we are bringing people into a relaxed physiological state to be able to bring their best thinking to the table?
Awesome. Thank you, Liz. Also, now that we've created this awareness, and I as an individual, as a leader, I can recognize when I've flipped from the brain model and I'm here. I'm in this space. What can I do if I'm able to have that awareness where I've flipped? I'm thinking with the prehistoric, the old brain. I'm in that fight or flight mode. The images are scaring me. The news I'm reading about COVID-19 has caused me to flip. How do I manually sort of override? What kind of steps could I do on a practical level to get out of that way of thinking?
Robin, I'm going to answer your question by taking a step back and to encourage all of us to be very selective about the media that we listen to and that we watch. Rather focus on well-validated pieces of information, because we know what gets the viewerships up is hype. And so during this period, unfortunately, a lot of what we're seeing and hearing is not necessarily true. There's some amazing advances being made, I think it's at Oxford, around a potential vaccine for COVID-19. We hardly hear anything about that. You may well have noticed. So it's more about the bad news, because bad news travels faster than good. So what I would do is encourage people to seek the good news. Go and find out what are the really positive things that are happening through this period. What are the really amazing advances that are being made when technology, the best of technology and AI and big data, is being combined with purposeful contribution, particularly in terms of the tracking of people during the lockdown period, for example. So that is the first thing. Try and avoid being triggered into fight, flight, or freeze. And to try and minimize that, the self-care, the things we've been talking about would apply. The second part of my answer to your question, Robin, is once we are here, if we are conscious of it, that is a really great start. Because that 90 to 98% of thinking, well, it's not really productive thinking, that we tend to do every day means we are not conscious that we are flipping our lid. It becomes an autopilot kind of reaction. And when we're conscious of what we're doing, just by thinking about it, it becomes a lot easier to close that lid. And the term we use is we self-regulate. A great technique to close the lid is really to focus on breathing. It provides a great brain-body response to bring us back into a relaxed physiological state. And as you say, mindfulness plays a lot here. If we're not getting enough sleep, we're going to flip a lot more, and it's a lot harder to be conscious about what we're doing. So try and avoid the trigger as far as possible. Be more conscious about it when you hear, and then more deliberate about what you do. And I've just named a couple of the techniques that work really well.
Perfect. Thank you, Liz. Another question coming through, which is very interesting, is bigger than the health impact of COVID-19 is the economic impact, which could be more devastating. From an NLP perspective, how do we deal with this?
Right. So NLP is one of the neurodisciplines, and part of NLP is about self-regulating. So what is the narrative in our heads when we hear pieces of information that are shocking and frightening, and how does that inform how we think? So the benefit of NLP is really encouraging us to keep a positive narrative going in our head around this. This relates back to the growth mindset that I was talking about a little earlier. It is acknowledging the crisis, it is acknowledging that it is scary and it makes us fearful and anxious. But the moment we bring the purposeful question in, so what can I do about it? What can I contribute? This will help a lot to inform a more positive narrative. It's like that little picture I showed a little earlier. You know, it's closed, but we're still awesome.
But still awesome. I love that.
Exactly.
Absolutely love that. So it's about reframing the narrative. And I suppose it relays back to that awareness. So be aware what your narrative is, be aware, and that awareness of what state you're in order to be able to deal with scenarios around you, which is not always easy. But I think once we get into a habit of doing that, I think it will make things much easier on us.
It will, Robin, and it informs the way we talk to other people about this particular situation.
True.
So when we're in this mode here, when we flipped our lids, what we're doing is we're perpetuating the negative message. And this is where NLP also has a really significant part to play. We need to be very conscious about reframing that narrative in our conversation for others. And again, this is where purposeful, conscious conversation really helps. It's not easy. It's easier said than done. But the more we build habits around this, the more instinctive this kind of response does get.
Thanks, Liz. Gerald wants to bring us into the business perspective, and he asks, in the business world, who is driving this? Is it owned by the HR function and supported by other departments? Where would we put who owns this way of thinking? Who owns the rewiring?
Every single one of us. We all have to take ownership for being human. We all have to take ownership of the amazing capabilities that we have as humans. And it is up to all of us to start these conversations with as many people as possible. In the business environment, one does not have to hold the formal title of leader to be able to start a positive conversation around purposeful thinking and purposeful behavior. So this is really not about title or power or how many squares we had in our office when we were still, working in traditional office space. It's got nothing to do with that. Fundamentally, purposeful thinking and behavior is an attitude and a state of mind. And Robin, it's fundamentally a choice.
Agreed,
it is a choice to think differently. Yeah.
I do want to at this point, however, say, and it's probably more of a comment, that it's not that easy, however. I think
Correct.
awareness is one thing, and understanding what one needs to do differently. But as a leader, particularly if we're leading now a virtual team, how easy is it to start these processes, start seeing a difference, and start leading in a different way?
So, Robin, the starting time is now, because we have to start with ourselves first. Otherwise, this is going to be an incredibly difficult leadership role to play. And you've got that beautiful analogy, which I'd love to share, is when we make the choice to live and work purposefully, it's like we have to step out of that automatic car, which is so easy to drive because we get in, we turn it on, and all we have to do is, pop it into the relevant spot, and off we go.
And go, yeah.
And we go, and we go, and we churn on that hamster wheel. That is a lot easier. We've got to get out of the automatic car and into the manual car. And we have to become more conscious and purposeful in engaging those gears. Because when we engage the gears, we become more contextually intelligent. Out of necessity, we become much more aware of everybody else around us and what contribution we have to make on the road to keep ourselves and everybody else safe. So when you shared that with me, I thought that that was an amazing analogy, but it has to start with me.
It has to start, and I think it's a great analogy, because especially if you're used to driving an automatic and now you suddenly have to change into a manual car, it's not that easy, and it's very clumsy at the beginning. And I think that's something we want to say. It doesn't feel normal until we start getting back into the routine of it, where it starts to feel a lot more comfortable. Leslie, thank you. I could carry on right until this evening talking about this. I've absolutely loved your presentation. Thank you for sharing with us. What I do want to say to all our participants is this masterclass really just brought you an overview and really just scraped the surface of this whole concept of the fifth industrial revolution and what happens next. At Regenesys, we are offering a course that will take this further, Les, which you are going to be working on with us in doing that, to take this further, to help equip managers with implementing some of these changes. Like we say, it's not going to be easy, might be a little uncomfortable. So we really want to support you. So we have a course going, the Fifth Industrial Revolution, What Happens Next, an introductory course. So please have a look out for that, as well as a course on coaching pods, which is designed specifically to coach managers through this. Could you touch a little bit on what a coaching pod is, Les, before we have to go?
With pleasure, Robin. So right the way through this conversation this afternoon, we've acknowledged that this change in the way we think and how we regulate our emotional response to crisis is very difficult, because it's counterintuitive in so many ways to the way our brains have been hardwired through history. And so what we have are what we call coaching pods, where we invite people in from different industries, different organizations, different sectors, to come and share experiences around particular challenges that are pre-agreed before those coaching pods start. So what we would look for in each coaching pod are what are the key challenges people are facing during COVID-19. If we relate particularly to what we've talked about today, is how do we gear ourselves up to be able to survive and thrive and lead others through and beyond this COVID period. And the coaching pod is literally where incisive questions are posed around how we unpack and we deal with these challenges and we find solutions together. So what we do is we optimize a very natural brain capability that we all have as humans, called collective creativity. That if we can think and talk through this together in a semi-structured kind of environment where the questions elicit high-performance thinking and enable us to critically review where we're at in our thinking, we're much more likely to come up with solutions. Coaching pods, Robin, can also be used to unpack opportunities, and where someone can bring a key opportunity to the table, and other participants in that coaching pod will contribute to the thinking around that. But in that process, we are all learning, we are all coming out of comfort zones, we're all in a space of manageable discomfort, which really enables insight generation for all of us. And we're being purposeful, we're contributing to key challenges and opportunities that are very relevant right now.